So again, my name is Rocky Hanish. I'm an instructor here at the architecture program at ASTU. I also practice as a designer at Shepley Bullfinch, and I'm also a researcher. Today, I want to talk a little bit about how architecture mediates nature, our relationship with nature. So how do we think of architecture as related to nature or connected to nature? Second is the idea that models mediate representation. So what we envision as a model, something that could be created in front of us, or maybe it's a climate model, or maybe it's a model of the earth, whatever the model is, it mediates our relationship with that idea of that thing. And the third is that urban acupuncture mediates transformation in cities. Now, you may not have heard the term urban acupuncture. Has anybody heard that term before? A couple of you? I'll talk a little bit about what it is. But basically, how cities grow over time is very much related to this idea of intervening in cities in positive and sustainable ways. So a little bit about me and my background. I was born in Minnesota. This is little me learning how to drive a car from my dad. And this is me unpacking my library. So my library is my most precious possession, I think. I think I have about 2,500 books total, or maybe a little bit less than that. And when I moved in with my wife about 3 years ago, when we got married, we decided to build this bookshelf. So it was a very special occasion to me to unpack the books. It's kind of like its own meaningful event to unpack the books and to see what that means for us. My wife is off the camera, right? You can't see her. She's handing me all the books as I put it on the shelves. It's okay. And recently I've gotten more into writing as a practice. I find writing is related to design in important ways. So as you move through your interior design, your architecture studios, always be writing, always be journaling, always be writing about your experience. It's incredibly valuable. This is a typewriter from the late 70s, which I have a big version of. It's about that big. It's like 40 pounds. And it's a big honking machine. And this is every single piece in the machine. It's about 2,300 pieces of that go into making this amazing typewriter that they made way back when, before computers were a real thing, right? I'd also like to talk a little bit about landscapes. How do we perceive landscapes? In the desert, there's a unique landscape here in the Sonoran Desert. But this was a hike I did in California back in 2015, and I hiked about 800 miles through the mountains. And it was one of the most life-changing events in my entire life. That's supposed to be a video. Maybe it doesn't work. That's okay. So hiking through the windmills, this is kind of the path that I took. I started right around here, hiked all the way up through the Sierras around to Lake Tahoe. This is the elevation change where I hiked, and I remember it well. So this is all the peaks and valleys. You can see the elevation on the left. And if you add up all the distance that I climbed vertically, climbing up mountains, it adds up to climbing out of the Earth's atmosphere, actually, which is pretty crazy. But my origins are from the suburbs. I grew up in the suburbs of Phoenix. And to me, as a kid, I didn't question the suburbs. I just thought, oh, this is a place where people live. But there's a long history to the suburbs and as a pattern of development that's very interesting. And you'll probably learn more about that in your urbanism courses and things like that. This is an artist who decided to represent the suburbs as they are, the kind of car-centric culture that is the suburbs and large parts of Phoenix, actually. As a kid, I was inspired by movies. This is a movie called The Red Balloon about a little boy who, the red balloon follows him around. It's a French film from the 50s. And I love this idea of miming architecture. How do we like perform architecture, but also how does it have an effect on us? This is a very brief lesson now in how to find the North Star. Does anybody know how to find the North Star already? Whoa, one person, that's it. Okay, so to find the North Star, if you learn nothing else, you'll learn where to find the North Star. When you're looking at this video, so if you're ever lost, you can always find the North Star. So even if the Big Dipper is rotated, it still points to the North Star. These are my rules for teaching and learning that I use in studio, which is that there are no dumb questions. You should always be curious. You should work hard, but be kind to yourself and others. I love theory because it's an approach to, let's call it advanced guessing, right, about the world. We construct a theory in our minds, a story in our minds to tell us about the world. And the theory has to start somewhere. and mine begins with my library. I would request that you all wander and persist in wandering. For example, my adventure on the PCT and the Pacific Crest Trail was one such adventure for me. You should always imagine as though this moment passes. We're here right now. We'll never have this moment again. So use the now that you have for everything it's worth. I like to collage. I like to use my imagination to bring photos and ideas together and just collage as a practice. Travel is one of the most life-changing things you can do. It opens up your perspective to other cultures, other ways of living. This is a sculpture in Switzerland by Richard Serra, which kind of blurs the line between architecture and sculpture. It's semi-architectural, it's the scale of a building, but it's also sculpture. I'd like you to always notice everything. When you're going to a museum, do you take pictures? Do you notice the detail in the art? Do you take it in for all it's worth? This is an artist I learned about from visiting the Phoenix Art Museum where this piece is. My wife and I are pictured here, kind of blurred by this curved glass. And Ed Mell has passed away. I think he passed away maybe a year or two ago. I forget exactly when. But he was an amazing artist, and he captured this kind of motif of the Southwest, which has always fascinated me. This was a project for a local architect where I was working with this firm a couple of years ago, and we decided to make an oculus that tells the time of day through this opening in a skylight. So in this time lapse, you see the sun moving, and this oculus projects a perfect ellipse on the surface of the ground at exactly solar noon, which is when the sun is directly above your head. So it's an experience in slowing down in architecture, not being so frenetic, not being so worried, and seeing time for what it is. This is what I designed to create that form. So there's two angles. One angle. And it's installed in the roof sandwich of the roof. There's a section of it. There's my boss and I installing it. So when you have an idea, all you need is somebody to help you test out that idea. It's an important idea that creativity implies balance, balancing technique with poetic understanding. So we have technical knowledge, and we have poetic knowledge, and architecture and creativity and design should merge those things into one, right? Use all the tools at your disposal to experiment, whether it's a pen, a piece of charcoal, the sun, a piece of paper, whatever you have, right? Use what you have. A couple of years ago, I bought a robot drawing machine, which was super fun to learn about how the interface between a robot and a drawing really works. And I did a number of explorations to do with digital form making, just as explorations of their own. Another rule, listen to your friend who wants to travel the world. Go with them. You'll learn so much from traveling. I can't say that enough. When I was 22, I had the opportunity, that's me on the right, to travel to Argentina and live there for about a year with my friend Vern. He's on the left. He now lives in San Diego. He's a practicing architect. And we did art installations. We did photography. We worked on architectural projects, all in the service of exploration. This installation was made of around, I think, 850 clothespins, all hanging in this catenary shape for a photography gallery. It was one of the most fun things I've ever made. This was the logo that Martine, our CEO of our little company, made when we did that installation. It was called Tender. And the idea was you interact with it. You come up and touch it. And you see how the pieces move. It hangs in this catenary shape because of the gravity of the pieces of wood, of the clothespins. Made some furniture. Always be making something. It helps you practice what you create, right? If you're an interior designer, if you're an architect, if you're any other major, you can make things in your own time. So we made this piece of furniture when we lived in Buenos Aires. We had customized the height of the shelves for the printer and the laptop and the speakers and all these different elements. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about the second point, which is what is a model? So you saw a real object like a shelf, right? Kind of a more architectural scale thing. But what is a model? And these are some of the definitions of a model, which is a miniature, a type or design, a system of postulates. So like another theory, right? A theory could be a model. An example or imitation or emulation of something, a version, a description or analogy, an organism whose appearance a mimic imitates, or a copy or an image. This was a model I made when I was an undergrad at ASU in, oh gosh, that was years ago, 2008. No, 2007, even earlier. And this was for a housing project in New Orleans where we were studying multifamily housing, looking at areas of the city that didn't flood and studying why that was. These are some models I've made and some projects, things that inspire me in some of my work, as well as some drawings. And my first job ever was making models, actually, for an architect out when I went to grad school at UC Berkeley. I graduated, wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, and I got a call saying, hey, you want to help us make some models? So I made this suitcase model, which flipped around. You see the suitcase behind it. It flipped over and turned into a model from being the case, which was super fun. This project was actually built. It's on the East Coast. It's a senior housing project. I've made models for cities to study different urban conditions. I've made little bug study models in studio with my students. It's a super fun way to study something. During the pandemic, we made lunchbox models because they had to be portable and small. So we turned all the models into miniature sized models that would fit in a lunchbox. Another important rule is forge friendships and collaborate. This is the plant lab, a project I did in grad school when I was at Berkeley. And some of my best friends, a team of us, built this structure that was a hydroponic garden. And the idea was that we could prove that you could grow a system of indoor food growth. You could build this thing, actually. So it was installed at the San Francisco Flower and Garden Show for about 2 weeks. And it operates by circulating water through this field of lettuce. The surface is kind of a parametric surface that emulates a landscape. And we designed and built this entire thing in a class that we made up ourselves. It wasn't even a class. We just said, hey, we want to make this thing. And the faculty said, okay, go for it. So if you have an idea, you can create it from nothing, kind of. We had a very small budget. But we were able to make this really fun object and system. This is us installing it. This is the frame at the top we had to bolt together with the water system that drips the water down to the plants. This is the hanging tubes that feed the lettuce the water and nutrients. And that's the final result. That same group of people was a core group. We ended up working on another project called, it was a bench, the Worcester Hall bench. It's still there today at the UC Berkeley campus. And where did we start? We started with drawing. We started with sketching. We didn't quite start with a model because we didn't have an idea fully fleshed out yet, but we started with the material connections. How do things connect? This is an inverted image, but it was a chalkboard full of all of our sketches. So this was like 4 hours of us drawing and erasing stuff and drawing again, erasing stuff, drawing again. And this is what the bench turned into, which is a folded form of a series of ribbons that break down according to their function. So some of the ribbons are for seating, some are for laying down, some are for socializing, or even there's kind of a little mini kitchen idea where you could kind of cook a meal down there. This is the layers of the structure. So there's a concrete substructure, back-to-back steel L shape that hold the recycled redwood, that's upcycled redwood, that comprised the actual bench surface itself. This was the shop drawings, which was my specialization in the project, was to make the shop drawings for the steel. Not as easy as it looks. Do you guys know what shop drawings are? Okay, so short story. When you draw something as an architect, the contractor has to make it real. But how do they know how to do that? Well, they can't just measure your drawings necessarily. Sometimes there's more of a degree of accuracy required in order to build what you've drawn. So they make what are called shop drawings, which are interpretations of your architectural drawings that give it more detail. This is the bench in the end. This is when it was brand new, so it was still a warmer tone. It's kind of grayed out over time. And this was completed back in 2011. Work hard, but be kind to yourself and others. I had the opportunity to work on site for a local design build company. This was a project up on Shea and 37th, 39th Street. And man, is it a challenge to work on a construction site. If you want to really learn something, work a little bit of construction. It's not always glorious and glamorous. Sometimes you got to fill the water truck to keep the dirt wet, but you learn something there too. This project was for a financial company, or is for a financial company. And so it's a really interesting typology. It's a kind of an office building, but everything in the building is rotated at a 17.5-degree angle to optimize its solar exposure. And the ceiling is this folded plate. So every single one of these trusses in the entire project was unique. There was not a repeat among them. This is what's called the reflected ceiling plan. Who knows what a reflected ceiling plan is? Interior designers, you gotta know that. A reflected ceiling plan is when you're looking up at the ceiling of a building in plan, right? So you're looking down at the building in plan, but you're actually projecting that, so you're seeing the ceiling. And this is all those components we had to figure out. Delivered air. Because I figured out every single one of those, or I suppose I did. It's important that we learn from failure. If you don't remember anything from tonight, I want you to remember this. Sometimes I'll be messing with a Grasshopper script or a Rhino model or something, and it won't work. And I'll think, damn, well, that's kind of beautiful. If you fail at something, it's a lesson. Someone who's experienced, more experienced than you are, has just failed more times than you have. Learning about architecture. As I progressed in my career, I got better at drawings and representation and modeling, learning detailing, how materials and systems come together, and also learning about BIM software like Revit. I also have the awesome opportunity to do some visualization, which is rendering for this house that's in Paradise Valley that's been built. It's almost finished. The rendering package included visualization to show the potential client what the whole house would look like, including an animation that I don't have a copy of here, but you kind of get an idea of the house. So the materials are stone and wood, warm materials that are of the earth. And this was a speculative house, so it wasn't designed with a specific client in mind. It was designed to be sold. But we still studied really interesting light conditions and had a lot of fun designing the details. This is a photo from about a year ago, and the house was still under construction. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about experimentation. In learning a new software and learning anything that's new, like I mentioned before, you're going to fail. You're going to fall down on your face and it's going to hurt. Not literally, right? But we have things that don't work. You got to get back up and try again. That's the most important part. So I worked on this design for about a month before I got it to work. This was an installation for an indigenous art exhibit here in Arizona. And I struggled to model this for so long and then finally got it to work. This was a shade pavilion that I had the opportunity to design with a local company here called Works Bureau. And it was sat over a reflecting pool where you would put your feet in water and the desert air would sink down in the space and cool you down. I'm also interested in speculative work. And speculative work I would define as work that's just for its own purpose, things that I just do for fun. So sometimes that's sketching. Sometimes that's a real project. This is a project for my alma mater, UC Berkeley. We were drawing and diagramming what an architecture for student life space could be like. Sketching and sketching and sketching, taking notes, sketching over other drawings. This is the campus at UC Berkeley, the South Part campus. And this is some of the final renderings of the project that we created, which is an entrance to the student life spaces on the main campus. Envisioning what a historic building that might be removed could be replaced with. There's an old saying from Pablo Picasso. You guys know Pablo Picasso? Hopefully a couple of you do. That to know what to draw, one must begin drawing. So if you're staring at a blank page and you're intimidated, just start. Doesn't matter what you draw at first. And this is the famous drawing of levels of detail of a bowl. There's the cartoon bowl on the right. Some of you drew the cartoon tree. Maybe some of you drew the more realistic tree, like a shading it or whatever, right? When you drew your trees. I like to draw without really thinking too much because it helps me think for some reason. Sometimes I draw diagrams. Sometimes I just doodle a little house that I thought of. Sometimes I model something in 3D just to experiment with an idea. But it's always in service of creating something, which is a positive experience. It's a learning experience. Sometimes just doodling a random idea that I had, or messing around with Revit and parametric software. And to close, I promise I'm near the end. I did create a book of photography, which I called Moment, which is about this moment in time that we experience. That's kind of a phenomenon that's fleeting, where you might remember this lecture years from now, maybe not, but it's a moment like that. And my book of photography was full of photos of my hikes and other things in my life that were really meaningful to me. And the last thing I'll talk about is urban acupuncture, which I defined earlier. This is Jaime Lerner's book. He was an architect also from UC Berkeley who was a mayor in a town in Brazil. And he was really interested in this idea of how do we create positive change in cities? With the history of the suburbs is such a complex territory. This is kind of some of the urban fabric here in Phoenix, right? This is kind of actually the neighborhood that I grew up in, full of cul-de-sacs and strange conditions that aren't very social. But as kids, we learned the red lines were the alleyways. That's where we play. That was our territory. And the suburbs, the legacy of the suburbs is some really top-down logic, not very good effects on cities, actually. There's some pretty scary things that have happened as a result when cities aren't allowed to evolve organically, let's say. And there's art about that, art about the suburbs, about signs and signifiers. What interests me more is how do we create a future that we can all have a hand in? This is an installation called Big Bamboo that was on the roof of the Met in New York back in, I think it was 2007 or 8. And it was a team of artists, and they just started lashing together bamboo on the roof of the Met. I don't know how they got a permit to do it. But it was pretty amazing, right? They made this whole walkable, climbable structure informally, with no drawings, no models. They just had a bunch of bamboo. This is an artist that inspires me. He makes walking sculptures out of this plastic tubing. And this is some of my thesis work that was speculative about how do we evolve the suburbs to be something more sustainable and that goes over time. So urban acupuncture really is this idea that small interventions in cities that have a meaningful, lasting impact can make a huge positive change in how we think about the future of urbanism and the future of cities. These are my fellow researchers, John Parman, Ilham Hassani, and myself. And we're working on this idea of urban acupuncture as applied to Phoenix. So hopefully it'll be a studio in about a year and a half in the graduate division here at ASU. But with Phoenix, the rising heat levels, global warming, and global climate change, it's really concerning that we have to deal with this issue of heat. It's ever increasing with the urban heat island effect. So how do we think about urban acupuncture in that context? Can we make changes that make it cooler, that connect us to the desert, and that return us to something that's more sustainable? And that's some more of the research. So thank you very much.